This is what was really clear with the rescheduling hearings that we just finished up, is that cannabis is changing, cannabis is coming, it's going, and I believe it's good. This is how I advocate for it. It's an outstanding product when it comes to dealing with anxiety, when it comes to dealing with inflammation. Again, because it's acting on part of your nervous system called the endocannabinoid system.
Initially, what I'm hearing is that through stressful situations, our endocannabinoid system goes out of balance.
Chronic stressful. So long-term chronic. So there's stress and there's trauma. So stress is usually something you respond to. Trauma leaves a mark. Okay? So you have these long-term traumatic stress events that leave a mark and change your hormone system.
Do we have any data to see how certain cannabinoids are able to restore this out of balance state?
Secondary. So remember, we're dealing with part of your brain. Okay. So I can't do a double-blind peer-reviewed study where we're harvesting the amygdalas of humans. You tend not to do very well after that assessment. But yes, there's lots of data on this.
I have a quick favor to ask before we start. I'm not even asking 30 seconds of your time. If you have been enjoying the 90% Healthy podcast, we truly appreciate if you hit subscribe. It genuinely helps us grow and reach more people and keep bringing you thoughtful conversations about health that actually moves the needle without losing your mind. We're really, really grateful that you're here and continue to be. Now let's jump in the episode.
Welcome back to the 90% Healthy podcast. I'm your co-host, Klaudia, Balogh, longevity journalist, and Don, hi.
Hey, Klaudia. Hey, everybody listening. If you haven't checked it out, go check out Claudia's article on Terry Crews. Where was that, Claudia?
So it's in Jet Set magazine. So it's in print, but they do
out.
have a virtual version. So it's such a genuine, nice human being.
What a cool interview. Just what a cool interview for you. Congratulations.
Thank you, Don.
So,
yeah, it was really, really amazing when I was told, like, hey, could you take on this cover story? And I'm like, could I?
Yeah. Can you,
Yeah.
do you think you can stand in between me and keep me away from it? I don't think so.
Yeah, it was really, really great. So, yeah, how you doing?
Is that your biggest interview so far?
One of the biggest, I think. Yeah.
I love what you're doing, so keep it up.
Thank
I'm doing
you.
good. I'm doing good. We've got a lot of things happening. Mode and method, we're getting that figured out. Keep your ears open. I'm getting ready to start to record a lot more social. This is what we're learning, is that everybody thinks that e-commerce is easy. It's not. Everybody thinks they're an e-commerce expert. They're not. And so much of it, you got to get worked out on your own. And so we're getting that worked out as a company, doing some cool stuff with my Train, Recover, Win, the Complete Athlete, things like that. Probably getting ready to start to write a book on HRV and the entire concept. I'm getting a lot of incoming on that, and I need to get that done. So getting ready, trying to be creative.
Hands are full. I like it.
Well,
yeah. Well, today our audience is up for some learning, and so am I, because we're going to be talking about cannabis and what's going in the industry where there are changes, there are requests for changes, there's a lot of confusion. I mean, this substance still has a lot of stigma around it. People have their opinion, using it, abusing it. There's just so much, and you have been in this space. You spent a lot of time in this space before you kind of paddled over into the longevity world. So what do you see right now?
It was interesting because back when I was at Ohio State the last time, 15 through 18, doing a lot of HRV work, I had some pro guys reaching out to me saying, hey, what do you know about cannabis and HRV? And I'm like, I don't know anything about it. My guys are NCAA athletes, and that we're still testing for that. And I had another good friend. I worked with a wearables company out in Albuquerque for a while, and it was an HRV-based wearables company. And the CFO, Stanford, NBA, real smart guy, leaves about the same time I left. He went up into cannabis in Oregon when I came back to Ohio State. And he's sending me articles and kind of pulling the veil back for me a little bit. And he calls me one day and says, hey, do you want to work in cannabis? And I'm like, this sounds really interesting. I just felt like there was something there I needed to learn. And so I took the jump. As I say, I went and jumped into the deep end of the pot pool. And it was an interesting year of my life that I left this really cool job at Ohio State, working with these athletes, doing some really good data work. And all of a sudden I'm living in South Florida selling weed. And I'm like, okay, how did this happen? But the learning that took place was amazing. Okay. For the episode, I went into PubMed, Klaudia, and I said, how many articles have been published in the last year with the term cannabis? It was about 9,000 articles. I said, how many articles have been published in the last year on GLP-1s? 5,000. Okay, that's a big deal. And we're going to talk about rescheduling today and kind of the history of cannabis. But this idea that it's not research, that there's no research on it, that's bullshit. Okay. There's a ton of great research. There's a ton of great science. It's largely been done outside of this country. It's largely been done using American dollars outside of this country. But it's the research into cannabis that gave us the understanding of a thing called an endocannabinoid system, part of our nervous system that responds to molecules that we found when we were researching cannabis. By the way, when we exercise, we create an endocannabinoid hormone that's called anandamide, the Zen molecule. That's the benefit of exercise. That's where the runner's high comes from. Klaudia, I've been teaching exercise science for 27 years. I taught for 27 years. I've been in the field for 35 now. And I didn't know about the endocannabinoid system until I, went across the pale and went into the space and started to learn. And it was an incredible experience.
I want to double click on that before we move on, because I would like you to kind of share a little bit about the endocannabinoid system that we have and how it interacts within the whole body and why we have been neglecting it.
Well, we didn't know about it. Okay. There's the big reason. It's new in our science. It's not, our understanding is not 20 years old yet. We learned about it. We learned about what's called CB1 and CB2 receptors when we started to when we're trying to study the effect of cannabis, THC, and how it works. Now cannabis has hundreds of other molecules that plant produces, hundreds, borderline thousands, that all have different effects. The cannabinoids can have one effect. Actually, they have multiple effects on the different receptors. Your CB1 receptor is up in your brain. That's the one that THC binds to create the high, to create that effect. Well, there are other molecules that cannabinoids bond to: CBDA, THCA, CBD, CBG, CBN. There's a whole string of cannabinoids. Largely, the CB2s are out in your peripheral nervous system, very much associated with inflammation. The CB1 receptors, very much associated with the ability to switch between sympathetic, parasympathetic, the ability to monitor that. This goes up into, so your endocannabinoids, I think I've talked about this on the podcast. One of the first papers I read when I was down there was the effect of fear conditioning on the amygdala. So in dogs and mice, now you can't do this study in humans because we have to harvest part of the brain to measure the effect. But dogs and mice that have gone through fear conditioning see a lasting drop of anandamide in the amygdala. So your amygdala is the part of your brain that recognizes danger. So you're sitting there and a lion walks through the door. The amygdala is the thing that says, you've got to do something now. It sends a signal down to the HPA axis. Then you start to get the release of all your stress hormones. Your stress hormones are there to give you the energy to get away from the lion. And it triggers from the amygdala. Well, there's a lasting drop of anandamide when you have chronic stress. So when someone, I go back and I equate this to the Vietnam era. I'm old enough to remember that. But when we had all these soldiers that we sent to Vietnam, we took these kids from here. I use the analogy a lot of times. If you're born in a rattlesnake pit, the only way you survive is through hypervigilance. That's the only way you can survive. Well, hypervigilance comes from that drop of anandamide in the amygdala. Okay. Now, if I take you out of the rattlesnake pit and I put you in a house full of bunny rabbits, you're still going to be hypervigilant because of that drop of anandamide. Even though the threat of the rattlesnakes are gone, there's a drop there. And this is an important part. So if you take, let's flip the analogy. If you've got these American kids who are living in bunny houses and you drop them into the snake pit of Vietnam, okay, that's a pretty traumatic experience. There's going to be a natural adjustment. And when you take them back from the rattlesnake pit and you put them back in the house of bunnies, there's still hypervigilance there. Mm-hmm. And this is where it starts. So this is where there was such an elevation in the use of cannabis by our soldiers coming back from Vietnam. Listen, they're trying to manage stress. They're trying to get their endocannabinoid system centered back down. Cannabis back then was very different than it is now. We'll talk about that as we go, I think, some today. We're going to do a couple episodes on this because there's more here than we can do in just one episode. But yeah, that's the point to me. And this is where it really centered in on kind of my experience. I had this experience with HRV, understanding the ability to shift from sympathetic to parasympathetic. Sympathetic is fight or flight. I call it fight, flight, or fear. Parasympathetic, rest, digest, or love. Shifting between fear and love. Okay, that's the important part that the endocannabinoid system helps you do. Well, if you don't have the ligands, if you don't have the necessary hormones on board, that shift is difficult. And this is why cannabis is loved by so many people who are struggling with stress, chronic stress, post-traumatic stress disorder, a disordered response to a stress trigger. That's, that was in the past. Okay. That's the effect of this ongoing drop of anandamide, this ongoing traumatic response that we have. That's a straight up survival response.
So initially what I'm hearing is that through stressful situations, our endocannabinoid system goes out of balance.
Chronic stressful. So long-term chronic. So anything, So there's stress and there's trauma. So stress is usually something you respond to. Trauma leaves a mark. Okay. So you have these long-term traumatic stress events that leave a mark and change your hormone system.
Yeah. And are we able to, do we have any data to see how certain cannabinoids are able to restore this out of balance state?
Secondary. So remember, we're dealing with part of your brain. Okay. So I can't do a double blind peer review study where we're harvesting the amygdalas of humans. You tend not to do very well after that assessment. But yes, there's lots of data on this. The National Science Foundation has a wonderful book on this where they looked at the research. Some of the research is not, what's the word I'm looking for? Not specific, it didn't turn out. Some of it's very clear. Yes, this works. So we need to continue to work on this. And what you see, and again, we're going to go over this a little bit with the history of how it became a Schedule I substance now. But there's been such a demand for this that states have overridden the federal ban, and states said, listen, feds, even if you don't want to approve this, we're going to make this work here. It first started in New Mexico, went from New Mexico to California. California made it go statewide. That's what really caught fire. And then you've had this series of states add on to where over half the states in the United States now have cannabis legally.
Yeah.
Now, the problem is, since it's a Schedule I, and that's what we're talking about today, since it's Schedule I, you can't have interstate commerce. I can't produce a cannabis product in Ohio and take it to West Virginia, Indiana, Michigan, or Kentucky.
Yeah.
I can't do federal banking. So if I want to put money in a bank that's FDIC insured, the banks are afraid of it because back when it became Schedule I, the government said, listen, if you do work in cannabis, we're going to pull your insurance. So banks wouldn't touch it. We're starting to see that change a little bit now too. So it's that federal Schedule 1 level that it's been under, which has prevented many of these things. And fact is, it's changing.
Right. It's
fact
been on.
Go ahead.
No, I just wanted to frame it for our audience. It's been under Schedule 1 since 1970. So it's been well over 50 years to really get that into the hands of people who really need it. Because I think that's what I know. Yeah.
We're going to talk about the fact it's been under Schedule 1 since 1970. And even in 1970, they said it shouldn't be Schedule 1. It just got kind of thrown in. And there's been lots of shady politics around this. We'll talk more about that, as in everything that's shady. There have been shady politics around this. But yeah, it's been an interesting journey. But literally, we're just finishing up 17 days of hearings. I fully expect this to become Schedule 3. It's not going to be Schedule 5, but it's going to be Schedule 3, which means you can go interstate. We can do research. There's not going to be a threat of losing your insurance if you're a bank or things like that. So it's going to become more consumer market friendly. And I think that's going to be good for the, what's the word I'm looking for? The non-adult use rec consumer, the person that's using, listen, I manufacture a product that uses cannabis extracts. Our mode and method, HRB Plus, has a cannabis extract in it, but it comes from what we call hemp, which there's very low levels of THC, if any, but we have known levels of CBD, CBDA, beta-caryophyllene, which is a terpene that we can talk about later. But I have a product that because of a thing called the Farm Bill allows for interstate commerce of hemp-based products. It's still cannabis. It's just cannabis that produces less THC than the other. It's the difference between Granny Smith apples and Fuji apples. It's still an apple plant, but there's a difference in the fruit that it produces.
But then something that, our audience may be thinking about, like you're talking hemp. We see hemp protein, hemp,
sure.
Like there's hemp, but that doesn't have THC. Is it extracted out of it?
No, it has to be grown in a manner so there's less than 0.3% THC in the plant. That's what defines hemp. And that's at the plant when it's grown, it's got to be there. It can't have any more at that point. So that's
it's scheduled
still cannabis.
So it's Schedule 3. So with Schedule C, you mentioned a little bit about what will be possible. What is it that it's still not going to be possible with Schedule 3?
Well, Schedule 3 is still a drug. There's still controls on it. There's still restrictions. Schedule 5 is going to be something like Advil. You sell it in the gross, and that may be the wrong analogy. I'm not a strong enough FDA classifier expert on that, but that's kind of what I'm going back to. It's going to be there's not going to be any. There's still going to be controls at this level for a period of time, and I think it's just a matter of time until the research that is either out there becomes public, or we empower our education systems and centers and research centers to do the research again and to lay it out there for us.
Yeah. And for our listeners, something, and correct me if I'm wrong, similar substances that are in Schedule 3 are, for example, ketamine. That is Schedule 3. So it is part of a treatment in a controlled setting, so it's not something you buy off of a shelf in your nearest pharmacy.
Right, and that's where cannabis is going to go to. And Schedule 1 means there's no medical benefit, it's addictive, and there's no value. Okay.
Yeah.
We've known that cannabis is not Schedule 1 for a long time. But again, back in the 70s, it got thrown into this one pot, and it's this right now. The things. Listen. When we take a look at the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, the Federal Bureau of Narcotics was established in 1930. Okay. And it had brought together a bunch of federal departments that were working on drugs at different levels. They just brought them into a suit, and that's when it became the Federal Bureau of Narcotics. So when that came together, it was mainly about cocaine and heroin. Those were the big two classes of drugs that were opium, not heroin, opium. Those were the two big ones. Okay. Now, we were putting cocaine in Coca-Cola at one point back then. There were,
Oh,
that was
gosh.
the active ingredient in Coca-Cola. Opium, that's an opiate. We're now selling those pretty freely now too. So, cannabis was in that class of drugs. But, did you ever see the movie Legends of the Fall with Brad Pitt? By the way, it's a great movie. It's one of my favorites. But there's a section of that where he's on this Asian sailing ship in an opium den, and he becomes addicted, and that's just part of his life. And it's interesting. Like opium was a real problem in this country back at the turn of the century, just prior to the Depression, just with the turn of the century. So that's where you see the Federal Bureau of Narcotics come from, and that's why they were organized. They did it in the early 30s with nothing to look. They weren't even looking at cannabis at that point. But then you saw the establishment, what's called the 1937 Marijuana Tax Act, and this was the first sign. Now, I want to back up just a minute on this. In 1839, William O'Shaughnessy had research that basically said cannabis is a tool that should be used in Western medicine. And it was part of the U.S. Pharmacopeia all the way up until 1941. So that's 100 years that cannabis was part of our Pharmacopeia. That's the list of drugs.
What does that mean? Okay, yeah.
That's the list of drugs that doctors can recommend to patients. That's been clear. Okay. So it was used for a long time. Now, the plant and the way it was raised and what was done was very different than it is today. And that's probably a whole nother episode, by the way. But it was up until 1941. And then they kind of took it out of the Pharmacopeia while the American Medical Association is lobbying to keep it in. You basically have them pull it out. You have the 1937 Tax Act, which didn't ban cannabis or marijuana. It just created taxes and paperwork that were so onersome that it just killed the business. Now, when you take a look at why did they do that? Well, I was doing a little research on this, and when you're in the industry, you have these folk tales that are going on. And I'm like, okay, how many tales are real and how many are false? But, William Randolph Hearst was the owner of Hearst Corporation, newspapers back then. And I heard someone say this at a presentation one time. They said, you can grow okay, let me take a step back real quick. Our Constitution is written on hemp paper. Okay. That's when if you were a member of the 13 original colonies, you were deed restricted to raise hemp. That's how important the product was. We made rope with it. Our first flag, Betsy Ross sewed the first American flag using hemp fibers. That's marijuana. Okay. That's cannabis. Let's not separate the two. Okay. That the fibrous aspect of this is an outstanding product. Well, the story was that William Randolph Hearst recognized that hemp was going to be a threat to his tree empire that he used to publish papers. And they said it was a coalition between William Randolph Hearst, the Bayer Corporation, because cannabis produces NSAIDs that are far more effective than water-based NSAIDs. They're oil-based. And the third was DuPont. DuPont had invented nylon and was creating nylon ropes, and they didn't want the competition from the hemp rope manufacturers. So that's the folklore. I believe two elements of that are closer to the truth than one. But this is where it became really interesting for me when I was in the business. The congressman that signed the 1937 Marijuana Tax Act was a guy by the name of, he's my uncle, Robert L. Doughton. Robert L. Doughton was a 22-term congressman from North Carolina and chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee under Roosevelt. We have Social Security today because of Robert L. Doughton and a deal he made with FDR to move the Blue Ridge Parkway out of Virginia into North Carolina through his constituent area. That's my great uncle. It's my grandmother's uncle. So I'm looking through all this stuff, and all of a sudden I'm like, ooh, Robert L. Doughton. I go, because I remember standing at a family reunion down in the mountains of North Carolina, and Robert L. Doughton's nephew telling the story at this family reunion about how Robert L. never did any legislation unless there was a deal associated for him. And it kind of reflects kind of where Congress is today too. And I'm like, I wonder what the deal was that Robert L. did to get the Marijuana Tax Act passed. So that kind of hit home for me when that happened.
Yeah.
So we have the Marijuana Tax Act, we have the pressure, and this basically really started to suppress cannabis as a medicine. Okay. Then in the 1970s, we see the Controlled Substance Act. This was Nixon's war on drugs. Okay. And again, it was mainly built around cocaine and opium. Those are the two big things they were going after. Well, but along the way, they said, well, let's go ahead and throw cannabis in there too, and we'll study it and we'll do this. And they made it Schedule 1. They basically left it on the schedule without the work. And it's been there ever since. So multiple states, again, starting in New Mexico, did it first. They had it, they lost it. California had it, kept it. We're seeing states pop up around the country, and we're seeing this was the beginning of the embargo on cannabis, growing cannabis, things like that in this country. But, and you know what, I forgot to look it up. I have to go look it up. The number of states that allow either medical or recreational use cannabis, allow you to grow your own. It's significant now.
Yeah, I wonder, in the conversations that you're having, I mean, this history has just really determined the state of how people think about it. Do you think there has been a change as it becomes a little bit more mainstream in how people look at this substance?
I absolutely do. And I think it's important to keep it framed in the fact that for the longest time, listen, back in the early 80s when I was going to college, and we were experimenting, okay? Cannabis was, on a college, imagine cannabis on a college campus, shocker. But we didn't, it was there as a recreational tool. And as a I worked my way through school, working in bars and working security concerts, and I could smell cannabis across an arena. If someone was smoking at a concert, I could smell it. And I still have that reaction. When I first smell it, I don't know, when's the last time you were in Las Vegas? You get out on the Las Vegas Strip, and it is strong cannabis, okay?
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm trying to think I don't think I remember smelling that in Florida. You get it
Not
in
that
LA.
Much. It's every now and then, but LA for sure.
Get it in LA. And that's just us. That's been our conditioning. We learn to associate those smells with feelings, and that's a problem.
Yeah.
Here's what I know is that, first of all, I don't advocate smoking. I don't advocate vaping. Chronic inhalation of smoke and oil is problematic.
Yeah.
Okay. There are wonderful ways. I'll tell you, there are transdermal solutions for cannabis on pain receptors, on inflammatory receptors. We make an oral preparation. It comes in a gel cap, and it goes through the stomach and the liver and works wonderfully.
Yeah.
I don't advocate smoking.
Yeah, this episode is not about making you believe that you should be using it, smoking it, doing anything with it.
No.
This is about educating on what's happening in the space with this substance and sort of breaking down the walls around what the research says, what's still missing, how it fits into somebody's life in a certain scenario.
Well, and what's coming.
In a controlled system, and what's coming.
What's coming.
Yes.
This is what was really clear with the rescheduling hearings that we just finished up, is that cannabis is changing. Cannabis is coming. It's going, and I believe it's good. I believe that when they break down the interstate controls that exist, you're going to have a lot less focus on cannabis as a rec drug, as a rec product. And you're going to start to see companies need to integrate as a wellness tool. This is how I advocate for it. It's an outstanding product when it comes to dealing with anxiety, when it comes to dealing with inflammation. Again, because it's acting on part of your nervous system called the endocannabinoid system. You have part of your nervous system that we named after the molecule.
Yeah.
And so part of what we're doing today is trying to educate around that. I said at the beginning of the show, I was at Ohio State doing really interesting work with the wrestling team. We're measuring 3.5 million data points a year with my wrestlers, and all of a sudden I'm in Florida, selling weed, and I'm like, what happened to me? Well, it was part of my pathway, part of my journey. And I think I've learned a lot. And I think it's an important discussion to have. And I think it's important to break down the stigma.
Yeah.
Because there is a stigma, and I don't think it's deserved. When you start to take a look at treatment resistant depression, cannabis is a hell of a tool. Okay. When you start, and then we can go into mushrooms and things like that as well. But when you start to listen, cannabis is a performance enhancing drug. Okay. When it comes right down, so is Advil. If I hurt and I take Advil and I don't hurt, I can perform better. Okay. It's working in the same pathways. It's working in the same anti-inflammatory pathways. So this is what's really important for what's to come.
And I'm one of those people, I'm fully transparent, who have not seen cannabis used in a good way in many people's lives. Like I have had many people I've seen who have abused it to a point of seeking the pleasure of the high, which I think is not necessarily the most ideal way of reaching for this substance, and the numbing and all of that. So that's the stigma that is in my head. That is what I associate cannabis with. For the most part, I'm learning and I'm exploring, and obviously the dosage is where it really matters, and terpenes and strains and etc.
Right.
But it's in the states where it is legal recreationally. I don't know what the data shows, whether it is still continued to be used in a safe manner, or is it something that gets into the hands of underage people, underage kids, and there are studies that point to it not helping brain development long term.
Kids under the age of 25 shouldn't use cannabis, shouldn't smoke it, shouldn't vape it. There's no doubt that in the formation of the prefrontal cortex, there's no doubt that the formation of the brain, that it can have a negative effect. Okay. That being said, there's no doubt that kids, by the way, kids shouldn't have access to social media either. Okay. So when we're putting together our list of things kids shouldn't do, cannabis is not the biggest problem on the list. Number one. Number two, if you want to make America healthy again, let's do something about cigarette smoking. Okay. Because the amount of cancer that is produced in our society from cigarette smoking is far greater than any damage that's going to come from the use of cannabis. Let's take a look at the effects of alcohol consumption. Okay. There are far greater risks and effects of alcohol consumption. It's not even close. It's not even close. Okay. So before we take this straw man and stick it up on the wall and say, oh, you're bad, I think it's important to pull it off the wall and say, okay, let's take this straw man apart. Let's figure out what's going on here. What's good. I am pretty comfortable saying that there's no real good reason to smoke cigarettes. I realize you may have a constitutional right to do it. My dad grew up in the mountains of North Carolina, and he was a 3-pack a day cigarette smoker for a long time. I mean, before he had his heart attack, which will change you. But this is part of the challenge that we deal with here, is that, yes, kids should not smoke cannabis, and we should do everything we can to keep it away from. And there should be penalties. Anyone, listen, I am a Second Amendment person. I believe in the Second Amendment. I think I enjoy firearms. I do this. But if someone uses a firearm to take the life of another human because a third human did not store that weapon correctly, that third person is as much trouble as the second. Yeah. Okay. If a child gets access to cannabis because the adult did not store it correctly, there need to be penalties there. There need to be real penalties there. I don't want to minimize that at all. But it doesn't change the fact that there are benefits. The same reason you shouldn't leave your Percocets out. The same reason you shouldn't leave any drug out. You have to pay attention to what's going on with this. And by the way, if we're dealing with a non-THC dominant variant of this product, the risks drop to almost zero. They disappear. So this is the other part of the argument that we have to pay attention to.
Yeah, and I love that you're pointing these out because I think these are important. And I think the education is what also needs to pick up the pace a little bit more.
Absolutely.
Because
that's why we're here.
Yes. Yeah, because you're here, this is it, this is bad, this is what happens. But nobody really explains how it interacts with your system as a whole and how to use it in a smart way,
Klaudia,
in a strategic way.
Did you grow up Catholic?
Yes.
Okay. So you remember being in the Catholic Church when they smoked the altar. Do you think 2,000 years ago that was sage?
Probably not.
It was cannabis. Okay. They've gone into these ancient Christian facilities that, like, there's one in Pompeii that was covered, and they find cannabis seeds on the altars. Okay. Yeah. Listen, there's a real interesting narrative around the Christ and the miracles of Christ and casting out demons. Well, I think 2,000 years ago, if someone's having an epileptic fit and they bring it to a healer, and the healer, we know CBD works well with treatment-resistant epilepsy. We know that. Okay. So back then, if you put CBD-based tincture cannabis extracts into the mouth of someone who's having an epileptic fit, don't you think that would be described as casting out demons 2,000 years ago? So there's some interesting looks at this. And so it's interesting to go back and look at the ancient history, to look at the practices, to take a look at this. There is no doubt that the modern church has been part of the casting the negative image on this. No doubt about it. It's been a big part of the organizations that have stigmatized the use of these products. And so, and then you also have this done, you have the racial aspect of this. One of the things you'll rarely hear me use is marijuana. Okay. Marijuana is a racial slur. Okay. It's a slur that was attached to cannabis. Now, it does have its roots in the Spanish language and the Southern languages, but it was used as, and again, you go back in the early 1930s. Do you remember? Well, you didn't go to school in this country, so you didn't get the Reefer Madness experience. Reefer Madness was a movie that was made about the problems with marijuana and how if your girls smoke it, they're going to want to have sex with black jazz musicians. That's essentially the message of the movie. By the way, there's a great Broadway play. Is it Reefer Madness? I'm trying to remember. The play is excellent, by the way, where they really take this thing apart. So there's been a strong racial element that was attached to the stigmatization of cannabis use that came along with the Marijuana Tax Act and the elevation that's been going on. So we're breaking down. We're getting ready to come up on a century of this, coming off of a century where it was in the U.S. Pharmacopeia, where it was part of the medicines that doctors recommended. Yeah. That's been the interesting flip in this. And this is kind of what we're dealing with now.
Yeah, it's an interesting word for me when people, because I've seen, people call it a medicine and abuse it and use it. So then that's where I have developed my own lens through. So I'm always curious to just learn how it can be a source of healing for people who are dealing with serious issues, whether it's PTSD or treatment-resistant depression or what have you. It's very interesting, and I'm sure as it becomes more of a Schedule III drug, it will go under a lot more research, even though there is significant, as you mentioned at the beginning.
Yeah, the research will become more relevant, more out in the public. The thing is, it was funny, again, when I went down to Florida and started to work in this space, one of the first things I found was a National Science Foundation, a 700-page book published by the National Science Foundation on cannabis as a medical tool. And they were looking at all the research. And I went and bought 100 of those books and started distributing them to doctors in Florida that recommended cannabis. That's how we were building our brand for the company I was with called Grow Healthy. The research, I have a research file on cannabis that's ridiculous. Okay. It's hard to keep up on, but it's there. It's legit. This is not a fly by night. We just figured this out day before yesterday. This is an ancient science. It's an ancient plant, and it's understanding ancient, and it has been stigmatized, and we're just beginning to see it come out from under the veil.
What do you think is next?
Well, so it looks to me, I'm waiting, so the Attorney General has already created an order that says, this was back in April, and they approved cannabis products plus state licensed medical marijuana. They're already moved to Schedule 3. So that was an executive order kind of a thing. This has still got to get passed. I'll tell you, people who work in this business are already doing DEA work to get interstate licensing and inter-country licensing. This is already happening.
Inter-country?
Yes.
See, that's the thing. Like, in Europe, it's only Netherlands that allows it.
But remember, in Canada, so let's go look at North America. Mm-hmm. In Canada, fully legal.
Oh, it is? I didn't know.
So yeah, so Health Canada had enough data from Canadian cannabis users and seeing the health benefits that they took a step back and said, we're crazy for not approving this. And Canada was the first North American country to say, okay, full on. Okay. So cannabis has this. So we're now going to be able to not go from state to state in the United States, but we're going to be able to go from state to country. Now, whether it goes to Hungary or not, that's, everybody's got to do their own home, governance, but I think you're going to see this break loose fast. It's an excellent agricultural product. When you look at the hemp industry, the Canadian hemp industry, it's amazing. And again, I go back to our freaking Constitution was written on hemp paper. Our first flag was sewn using hemp fibers. We were in the 13 original colonies, you were deed restricted to grow hemp on your property. You had to grow hemp if you owned property because it was so valuable.
And from a business point of view, it would become, with the Schedule 3, even more of a shiny object for business owners because of the tax breaks, right?
I'm not sure there'll be tax breaks. This is the other thing
there's some type of a tax angle that I've seen about it.
Municipalities, organizations are taxing the thunder out of this. Mm-hmm. Okay. This is a wonderful revenue source for municipalities and states. Now, typically, cannabis that is sold in the medical market in a state is not taxed to the consumer, but the growers, the processors, they're paying tremendous taxes on this. So there's a huge revenue source here.
And apparently they can't write off pay and marketing and expenses as other businesses can.
It's a much more difficult business environment, but even with that, there's a lot of money in this place. I mean, when I was working in Florida, you couldn't put money in the bank a lot of times. So there were rooms, big locked safe rooms full of cash. And you can imagine in Florida with its history with the drug trade and so forth going on. It was interesting. When we were down there was this big shipment of cannabis that came in from the Bahamas that was laced with fentanyl. So it was illegal coming into the market. And what is if you buy cannabis from a licensed Florida grower, where that plant was from the time the seed was planted until they hand you the package. They're able to track it all the way back. Okay. So you get rid of this. Now it's more expensive than what you buy on the street. So if you want the street stuff, you risk the fentanyl poisoning and those kinds of problems. But yeah, that's part of the two markets, the illicit market and the open market.
Yeah, because that's another with any type of substance. The quality control, where is that going to fall?
Well, in licensed states, it's already there. So there's already very significant quality control steps multiple testing at multiple levels. It's very, very good. It's a very good process. I was happy to represent one of those brands. I felt very good about the fact that when someone bought a product from the company or any of the licensed companies that were down there in Florida, I thought most of them just did a great. You had to. First of all, those licenses were a lottery ticket. Getting one of those was $1 million. It was a Willy Wonka golden ticket. And you didn't put that under threat at all. Okay. Now, one of the challenges that we have, there was just a special, I think on 60 Minutes within the last month, taking a look at the illicit cannabis trade in California, up in Humboldt County in the northern, what's called the marijuana triangle up in Northern California. There's a lot of illicit cannabis coming out of there going across the country. And that's a problem. We need to get a hold of that. We need to get on top of that. But bootlegging cannabis is only, you could only bootleg alcohol when there was prohibition. Once prohibition was breaking, it comes under companies and there's rules that you follow and you tax it and you follow through. And that's what's going to happen with cannabis.
Do we know anything about a timeline?
Now, okay, let me be careful here. I've been looking for this for 4 years. Literally, there are Republican senators and congressmen in cannabis states and hemp states, and there are Democratic Republicans. There are Democratic senators and congressmen from Democratic states that have the same objective here. There's been a bit of pushback from the religious right, which, take it as it is. But I see this, especially now that they've gone through with the hearings. It was interesting to look at those hearings that, one of the things that we saw was there were 7 anti-rescheduling groups that dominated most of the hearings, but the industry only had 2 people testify. Why is that? It either means they didn't need it, or someone was trying to tip this thing a certain way. But everything I hear, and we're going to keep an eye on this, everything I hear is this rescheduling is happening, and we're getting ready to see a big change in cannabis and the cannabis business as we know it.
What do you think is the big takeaway for our audience when it comes to our 90% healthy ecosystem?
Number one, I believe there is a class of plant medicines, and I'm putting air quotes on that. Linalool is the terpene that lavender produces. That if you put lavender on your pillow, it causes you to be sleepy. That's linalool. If you have lemongrass in your apartment, okay, and you feel energized from the smell of grass or lemongrass, that's a terpene called limonene. Okay. When you walk into a pine forest, your central nervous system adjusts down because of a terpene that's called alpha and beta pinene. When you eat pepper, mangoes, you eat a terpene that's called beta caryophyllene that actually hangs on more receptors than CBD does. CBD actually doesn't hang on a receptor. That's a whole nother podcast, by the way. But plants create plant chemicals that are healing. We've known this for millennia. The molecules that drug companies have patented and taken through the pharma system have benefit. And I don't want to minimize that at all, but that's not the only molecules that have benefit in our environment. And cannabinoids, in particular, the ones I like, CBDA is a very powerful cannabinoid in lowering inflammation, in lowering anxiety, in dealing with the impact of the endocannabinoid system. It's excellent. It also hangs on pain receptors and inflammatory receptors. It helps reduce pain. It helps reduce inflammation, and it's beneficial. Okay. So whether it's a terpene or whether it's a cannabinoid, they can be very close, but these are plant extracts that are very beneficial that you know what? I'll tell you, I've got some transdermal cannabis rubs that I'll tell you what, when your back's hurting, these things work. Mm-hmm. They work. They lower pain. They lower inflammation, and they have a little more THC than most of the stuff I work with. But there's real benefits that come from this. So the message to the 90% healthy community is, let me think about this. I would rather get my medicine from a plant than a pharmacy, personally. If I can use a plant extract to deal with my pain from whatever reason I have pain, rather than a Percocet, I'm going to do that. Rather than an opiate. So anytime I can use a plant medicine and it works, I would rather do that. And, some of one of the fun things about working in the industry, I called them the witches of the industry. There were these women, they were healers. Okay. They were healers to the bone. Many of them were nurses. Many of them were doctors. They were healers, and they had and a lot of them wore the flowing robes and the Stevie Nicks look. And I'm like, you are such a witch, because a witch used to be a healer. In the medieval times, witches were the women, were the midwives, were the healers. This was an important part. And again, the politics of the church, the politics of the schools, the politics of this really moved women out of these healing communities. And when you start to study this is interesting. But I love working with healers that understand how to use plants. I happen to have a good connection to the Amish community here in Central Ohio. And when I go work with these people, I hear about how they use plants in the healing ceremonies and in the healing processes that they do. I think it's important for us to get back to that if we can. Klaudia, when's the last time you're out in the middle of a forest and you smell that pine smell and you take your shoes off and you ground? We know now that we have wearable technology, we know that we are modifying the state of our autonomic nervous system. We know 100%. That.
Yeah.
And we know now that, again, our guest 3 or 4 episodes ago, JP Erico, when we're looking at the longevity theory of aging based on autonomic performance, we're talking about longevity here. We're talking about healing, living longer, better quality of life. So I hope that our community looks at this, doesn't buy into the stigmatization that has happened with this area. When I see someone, unfortunately, I use the term stoner too much. I talk about stoner brands and things like that, and I use them too much. But I want to get to the point to where when I see someone who may be ingesting cannabis and they look like it's been hard, I want to have compassion. I want to have compassion that maybe they had to deal with some shit that I didn't have to deal with. They've had some trauma I haven't had to deal with. Their life has been affected, and I want to have compassion first. Now, if you're in an indoor concert venue and there's no smoking in there, you got no business lighting up. Okay. I'll come down on that like a ton of bricks. Okay. There's a time and a place. Set and setting is what we talk about.
Yeah.
And I think this is important for society. We've been sneaking it for so long. It's time for society to readjust to this about how we integrate these molecules into our societies.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of education, I think, that needs to be done, and I'm glad that we're part of it. And I do encourage our listeners to share their story and just share some comments or share this with somebody who's been curious, skeptical, or any of the spectrum in between, to really try to look at it. And I really like how you framed it with compassion, because that's usually as a hard one for me, especially when I see it abused, where I feel like if it's part of a strategy of you're doing the work and it's helping you, then okay. But if you're relying on this to do the work for you and you can't live or try to get through life without it, that's where it's a little bit harder for me.
Let's try not to judge. Let's try and take a step. This is hard for me too. Mm-hmm. I can be a judgmental prick. I get it. Okay. I've talked about positive intelligence, the book Positive Intelligence. I believe that is a natural saboteur of ours. I believe that when we're judgmental, we're sympathetic, we're fearful. We judge what we fear. Okay. Yeah. I want to be loving. I want to be parasympathetic. And if someone is challenged with this, I need to be compassionate. I need to feel love. I need to feel like, okay, I don't know if there's something I can do to help you, but if there is, I'll try. and we can't help everybody. I get that. But I know I want to be, I want to put my judge aside and be able to bring up the side of me that helps. And it goes back to my personal mission, understanding the changes necessary to alleviate suffering and contribute to the betterment of well people. At some point in time, that's what we go back to. And I know as a professional in this space, that's kind of where I want to adjust to.
Awesome. Thank you, Don. You're so
Thank you, Klaudia.
Yeah. Well, my microphone keeps buzzing. So if anybody's like, what is this? What's going on with the audio? My microphone is being a little bit.
Well, this is, again, we've been, as we discuss episodes, this one's been bouncing around for a while. Yeah. We finally, listen, we had these hearings going on. We're getting ready to do episodes on peptides and the rescheduling of peptides and those kind of things. There's a lot happening right now, good, bad, and different, but I want to understand it. I'll tell you this. When I look at the impact of cannabis medicines versus peptides, cannabis medicines are far more powerful, far more ancient, far more effective. Okay. And I'm not minimizing, I guess I just did minimize peptides, but I don't want to devalue them. They're very valuable. But when I look at the things that really make a difference, you know what? Besides standing in a pine forest and getting sun in our eyes and doing and our feet on the ground and feeling grass and just rubbing nature all over us, that's one of the most powerful things.
Let me tell you, I just spent a couple of days up in the Florida Springs, and did I feel like I was out of country? It felt like time froze.
Yeah.
And I was paddleboarding in the middle of freaking Florida and literally just surrounded by nature. And it felt like time would just be.
And Mr. Alligator came up and said hi.
Oh, and it was just like, peas are peeking. I'm like, hi. I'm like, okay, I'm going to go.
Yeah. So I've done that too. And I can't paddleboard very well. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to be
I'm sore. Like, no joke. Yes. So, yeah. Well, we will have more conversations about this coming up. So stay tuned. If you
have questions, please reach out to us. You can find me at Train, Recover, Win. There's a contact me there. That's my website. You can learn more about the cannabis medicine we talked about at Mode and Method, www.modemethod.com. If you decide to try HRV Plus and order it, if you'll use Don as the discount code, you'll get 20% off. Yeah. So that gives you a little incentive to try that. Or you can find Klaudia at Longevity Journalist on social media. She's doing a hell of a job as a journalist, and I'm excited to have her as a partner.
Well, likewise. This has been a wonderful run, and I'm looking forward to keep on running. So stay tuned with us, stay in with us, comment, share, drop a comment in the Spotify or Apple, wherever you're listening, because that really, really helps us get higher rankings and just get in front of more people. So that's a little bit of a selfish ask on our end, with a selfless piece where we just want to spread the message to more people. So
share it with a bunch of people, really, whether they listen to it or not. Just share it. Yeah. That helps us.
Yeah.
That's currency for us.
It is.
Thanks, Klaudia. Talk to you next week.
Thanks, everybody. See you next week.
Bye-bye.